Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 10 Best Practices for Training. I'm Ronnie Musselwhite, Director of Content and Education for the National Golf Course Owners Association, and on behalf of the entire NGCOA, thank you for your participation. Today's event will last approximately 45 minutes and is being recorded. We will provide access to this recording and all presentation slides soon after the webinar. We will also post this webinar on our NGCOA members-only networking Accelerate. Today's webinar is the fourth and final in a series of 4 hospitality-oriented webinars we've been hosting over the past few weeks. The focus of the collection has been on creating an environment that's customer-centric and wholly committed to delivering the best guest experience possible. We're using these webinars as something as a test run as part of a comprehensive hospitality-based training program we're in the process of developing and hope to launch next year. Now I'd like to introduce Whitney Reid Pennell, who will present today's webinar. Whitney is owner and president of the award-winning consulting firm RCS Hospitality Group. With more than 30 years of experience in the industry, she is recognized as an expert in club management with a sharp focus on operations. Prior to founding RCS, Whitney has held several top management positions with companies such as Marriott Management Services, the Desert Mountain Club, and Troon Golf. Since founding RCS in 2000, Whitney and her team have worked with hundreds of clubs of varying types and sizes, assisting with everything from budget and service troubleshooting, new club openings and remodels, to the rollout of strategic plans and the development of training programs for lasting improvement. We're certainly excited to have Whitney here with us again today and look forward to the insights she has to share. Now, if during today's session you have a question, please type it into the message box located at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. To submit your message, simply press Enter. Whitney will field the questions and answer them as time permits. And with that, I'll turn things over to Whitney. Whitney?
Great. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited about today because we saved my favorite subject for the last topic in this hospitality webinar series, and that is best practices for training. So I'm going to go through what I consider to be 10 best practices, and I'll touch on a lot of different things, everything from creating training plans to hiring right, how to develop and deliver the training, how to select trainers. So I'll move through it fairly quickly because there's a lot of information, but I do encourage you to ask some questions. So I want to tell you why training is a passion of mine. Long before I was recruited into the club business, as Ronnie mentioned, I had a management career in hotels. And if any of you came from hotels, you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. But in hotels, training employees is an absolute culture, and training for them is an investment. It's something that they budget for, they plan for. They have whole training managers, training time set aside. They have formal onboarding programs, weekly training opportunities, and a structured management training program. I would not trade that experience for anything. But when I got into the club business, I realized that training was often viewed as just orientation, or many clubs don't really have the resources to do a formal training program or structured management programs like hotels do. They just simply don't have the same budget and resources available to them. So ever since I got into the club business, I've been on a mission to help managers and staff receive training, the training they need, and also to help teach people how to be good trainers, because it's really not as easy as just I'm a really good golf pro, so I'll be a really good trainer. I'm a really good server, so I'll be a really good trainer. It's just not that simple. So I'll review with you today what I think are the qualities of a good trainer. I happen to believe that anything can be accomplished through training. Training assists with promotions from within, which deepens your bench if you want to think about it like a sports team. Training can upgrade or improve standards or correct poor performance. And training is also a tool to resolve any operating opportunities. And of course, it's also used to orient new employees to your culture and service standards. So before I get into these 10 best practices, I just want to be sure everyone understands there's so many benefits for training, and the training benefits for you if you're an owner or manager of a club, the benefits of the club, you can reduce your turnover costs, you can reduce your labor costs if people are more confident and competent in their positions. I mean, if you're always working with your A team, you're obviously going to have some reduced costs. You'll have greater consistency if everyone's trained the same way every time. You'll have employees with greater confidence, more growth potential, and development opportunities. And obviously, through training, you can upgrade or improve your standards. And if you've been joining us for these hospitality webinars, you've probably heard me say that service and the people that are touching your customers give you the absolute competitive edge. So training really results in, to me, the competitive edge. So the benefits for your employees is you can provide a good first on-the-job experience. It gives them less stress because they feel like they know what to do. There's not a lot of unknown. You can train to have better teamwork, more job enjoyment. Obviously, training around job performance and standards and techniques, and greater respect and esteem from customers, peers, and bosses. If you have highly qualified employees who are able to do their job as entrepreneurial thinkers, is what I like to think of them, your customers are going to connect with them a lot more. And your employees also, through training, can feel more professional, and that's only going to benefit the company in the end. So when we think about training, we're really trying to produce change, and we're looking to change something, either skills, knowledge, or attitudes. So when you're training about changing skills, you might be looking at how to do something, steps of service, systems and processes. If you're trying to change knowledge, you're trying to help someone maybe with their critical thinking or decision-making ability. So you go about each of these a little bit differently. And then the last one here with attitudes, this is the one that I see young or inexperienced managers really having a tough time with, because this feels uncomfortable to go and have a conversation about someone's behavior, their values, but you're trying to get them on board to do the same things that the club, have the same values the club has. So what I tell young managers or inexperienced managers that training and coaching, which I consider to be part of training, and we'll talk about that as well, it really shows the employees that you care about them. And if you don't take the time to try to produce change when they step out of line or they don't do something that you expect them to do, you're actually not caring about them. If you don't do anything, you're setting them up for failure, and eventually they will work themselves into a position where they will no longer be employed by the club. So I hope that you care enough about your employees that you understand when you do this training, when you do this coaching, you're actually helping them, you're actually caring about them and helping them to move forward with you. Okay, so let's get into the best practices. First of all, I know it seems weird that hire right would be the very first one, but the very first step in training best practices is absolutely hire right, because it is near impossible to train a bad hire or someone who doesn't share your goals or your values. So when you're getting ready to hire, I think it's really important to take this step seriously. A lot of people, and I'm guilty, everyone I think is guilty of hiring the warm body. Someone who's available, you need them, you need a set of hands, you bring them in, but maybe you didn't take enough time to get to know them or ask the questions you needed, and you discover they're not a great hire. Those bad hires can actually cost you a lot of money in turnover or lost business or even lost employees possibly. So I have here just 3 steps to help you. So the first thing I think that's really important is do a needs analysis. Understand what you're looking for in a candidate and why, and then design your questions accordingly. And one thing I would say is every manager who has the opportunity to hire should be trained on hiring, because if you're not actually trained to do it, what happens is we ask a lot of yes and no questions. We might ask, what did you do in your last job? And it sounds pretty similar to what you want them to do in this job, but you haven't actually asked them any critical thinking questions to find out where their head is. You haven't asked them about customer service opportunities. You haven't asked maybe about teamwork or how they were as an employee. There's a lot of questions, a lot of open-ended, I call behavioral style questions that you can ask to get a better picture of the employee. So when you're walking into the interview, it's real important that you know what you're looking for, you have a realistic job description and an organizational chart so that this candidate that you're talking to knows where they would fit in the organization. Also very important to know what you have to offer. That may be it's your first impression with the employee. It's how they're making a judgment about you as an employer. So if you don't know what you have to offer in terms of wages or benefits or club privileges or something like that, if you offer that, it's real important that you know that. And again, knowing your company's core values and how to spot them in a candidate. So if you hire for values and train for skill, if that's at all possible, and there are a lot of positions in our business where you can do that. Now, there's obviously positions that require specific skills and education, and I understand that, but by and large, you still should be looking for the values that you want. And certainly, if you are someone who is interested in service culture and trying to either create a new culture or maintain an outstanding service culture, this is your very best chance to do that, hiring people who have the values that you want. Okay, so the next step, the next best practice I have is creating an onboarding program. And onboarding basically means you're taking your new hires and you are quickly engaging them as an employee and indoctrinating them into your culture. There's no better time to do this than on day one. This is when you validate their choice of you as an employer and get them excited about being there. A great onboarding program provides your new employee with confidence and hopefully competence in their job because you'll give them the information they need to be successful. It's important to remember that they don't know anything yet about your club, your systems or processes, or anyone that works there. Sometimes we skip over a few things in training because we assume someone might know or they'll ask a question if they have it. But new hires, they're taking in a lot of information. So when you're putting an onboarding process together, I think about it like a pyramid, and you have to first create the foundation, and that's your onboarding. That's when you come in and you meet the team, you give them critical information they need from HR, where to park, do they get meals, do they get a uniform, when do they get paid, how and when do they take breaks, do you have a cell phone policy, the things that they need to know about what's expected of them as an employee overall. Once you do that, then you can move on to more information about the club, who you are, what you do, why you're special, the who's who of the club, the different people that make it work, and any critical items that they need to know about the club. I always recommend people use frequently asked questions as part of their onboarding program. And these frequently asked questions, I see them as twofold. One, I see frequently asked questions by new hires to make sure that you have everything answered that someone is likely to ask in case it doesn't come up, through the training, or it's a question maybe someone's afraid to ask. And then also frequently asked questions by customers. And the reason I think it's important that every new hire get that is because your customers spend more time with your line employees than anyone. So giving them the actual words that you would like them to use, and I'm not saying in a robotic way, but give them the information and present it in a way that you would like it to be repeated back to your customer. So if they ask questions about having a golf tournament, or can I play a fivesome, or can I bring additional guests, can I bring a group of 12, whatever frequently asked questions you might have, or can I special order something in the golf shop, how long does that take? You want to be sure that every employee has that information and they're giving out accurate information, because from a service standpoint, if the worst thing that can happen is someone gives wrong information to one of your customers, because then it sets their expectation. And if it's wrong, it's likely to fail their expectation. And that's where the dissatisfied customers come from. So once you build this pyramid and you have, you've taught them about the club, and you've help them get to know where they fit in. The next thing then would be departmental training, wherever they're working. And these are the actual systems, processes, and procedures they need to know to be effective in their job. And then the last thing with this onboarding program is skills testing. Very often, I see people do maybe 2 weeks of training or 3 days of training, and the managers try to put in so much information into that time. And I always equate it to trying to give someone a drink of water with a fire hose. It's just too much information for someone to take in. So doing the skills testing helps you to know if they're getting it, right? If they understand it and they're able to repeat back to you or show you what they've been trained. Because the goal of training is obviously for them to retain it and to be able to use that information in their job. Okay, number 3 is choosing and training good trainers. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people being used as trainers who actually have no desire to train. Or they don't have the patience to train, or they don't have the respect of their peers to train. So I've listed here what I think a good trainer should be, and that's interested in training. I think they should be self-confident. If they're not self-confident, they're not going to have an easy time training people because they'll be working with their own emotions the entire time. They should be subject matter experts, obviously. They should be a good communicator, patient, because a lot of things can happen during training. They should be adaptable and understand how to communicate with different personality types and different generations even. We have such a multi-generational workforce. I think that's important as well. A good trainer should also have a sense of humor and be able to laugh at themselves as well. A desire to learn, because I think every time you train, you learn. And you have to be willing to learn and take in information and always be open to new ideas as well. They should have the ability to really listen and understand what a trainee might be asking or what they might be getting as feedback so that they can make sure they understand what's happening in the training. And lastly, I think it's real important when you're choosing a trainer, they should have a cool head and a warm heart. And what I mean by that is they should care about the people they're training, not get frustrated with them, not think they're superior to them. And they should not be quick to have emotional outbursts in any way. So I always use the example of one of my older brothers. He was trying to teach me how to throw the Frisbee. And I couldn't get it. I didn't understand the snap of the wrist. And he kept saying, just throw it like this. Just snap your wrist. And he just kept saying the same thing over and over and getting real impatient with me and speaking to me louder and louder. And I finally said to him, you can tell me that all you want, but something's not working. I'm not understanding you. You have to change your methods. So I always tell people that it's the trainer's responsibility to be understood, not the trainee's responsibility to understand. And that's why I think it's real important that when you're putting a training plan together, you really have to choose your trainers well because they could make or break your entire program. The number 4 that I have here for best practices is really understanding that the big service manuals that we wrote, I don't know, in the 70s or 80s, I was trained with 300 to 500 page service manuals, and we would have a process, one process per page, and that way of learning just doesn't work anymore. There's just too much technology, too many different ways to access information. So using blended learning really helps to boost retention. So once you choose your trainers, now you have to think about training and how to develop and deliver the training. And everyone learns differently. Everybody filters information in differently. And we believe at RCS, we believe that using blended learning techniques is the way to go. So blended learning means you might do some training in a classroom setting where you're showing everyone how to do something. You have one presenter, maybe you're showing them how to, do something with a club, or maybe it's on a computer screen. You might have some manuals. I don't recommend the big in-depth manuals anymore because people just don't have the time or take the time to read them. I now recommend to people to create training plans around their critical service steps and put those in writing and document those. There's also online learning opportunities, obviously. A lot of people use YouTube to learn, so I think that's the next wave. It's a growing business, obviously, but that's a great way to help boost your learning. And then hands-on or on-the-job training, which is probably what most people use. The one thing I would just want to say about that for the on-the-job, very often people use something called shadow training. And shadow training is where a trainer and a trainee are paired together, and the trainee shadows the trainer throughout the day, throughout their shift. What I see sometimes go wrong with this is that the trainer is not given more time to do that job. So, for example, it's basically just throwing a trainee into a regular shift, and the trainer has to still do every job task that they normally would, and they don't really have time to stop and spend, having conversations or showing someone as a trainer. So what happens, sometimes those trainees don't really learn the process start to finish. They get a lot of information thrown at them because in the middle of trying to do the shift, they get inundated with information. So as an example, let's say you're training someone in outside services, how to just help someone get on a cart or retrieve their bag. And if you have cart storage, I'll just use this as an example, or maybe someone is waiting for someone else. So a trainer who's expected to do that for a large group, if they have a trainee working with them, they won't be able to stop and give them the critical service things that you might want, like using a customer's name if you know it, telling them what's happening on the course, helping them to their cart, carrying their bag. This is how you do it. If you notice a club needs to be cleaned, is there something you can do about that? These are the things that you hope the trainee is getting, but instead they end up just being kind of a gopher for the trainer for the day. So if you use the shadow training, I would just encourage you to really look at lightening the load on your trainer for that shift or those 3 to 5 shifts that you might be using shadow training to allow them the time and opportunity to really focus on conducting that training. As part of the blended learning, I think it's also important to understand that you're dealing with adult learners, and adult learners learn differently. But the ways to boost retention, I have some statistics here for you. And I know they always say consultants make up statistics, but I actually did not make these up. But people generally remember 10% of what they read. So those service manuals, those 300 to 500 page service manuals, 10% is coming through if you're not reinforcing it with talking about it or showing them something in it, which will then boost the retention to 30%. If you're training and showing someone something they can see and hear you talking about at the same time, they're likely to retain 50% of that. And anything that you have them write down, this is very often why people like me in seminars and we have a lot of fill in the blanks, because if you write it down or we ask you to say it, very often I'm repeating information over and over because those are the key things I want people to remember, or I'll ask people to repeat it back to me. So if someone says it or writes it, that's a 70% retention rate. And the best thing you could do is bring it all together for a 90% retention. If people can do something while they talk about it, while they experience it, you have a 90% retention rate. So one of the things that we've been doing, recommending to our customers as part of training and using this blended learning as an example, if you have a large club or a lot of different areas that you want the employees to get to know and be able to find their way, once you do a tour of that area, the next step that we recommend is something almost like a scavenger hunt, where you would maybe plant things, but you would create a list. You would let them go out either on their own or with another employee. So a couple of things are happening. They're getting to know another employee, and as people get friends at work, they become more engaged. So that's the reason for doing it in teams. Sometimes you could also do it as competition, and anytime you tap into someone's competitive spirit, it's more interesting and fun for them, and then it feels like there's more in it for them. But then you send them out around the club, and you might say something, like go plug a cart in the cart barn, go get ice for for an ice chest, or set up a beverage station on number 7, or, whatever's kind of critical that you want to reinforce. We use it a lot in food and beverage to help them, learn where the dry goods storage is, the linen rooms, where do they get a Schaefer, where do they get bottles of wine, things like that. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this blended learning. And also, a lot can be done, especially with new hires. If you're a seasonal club and you bring in a large group of employees every year, one really great way to get people on board is set up small training stations and get several managers or supervisors involved. In each area is a small training station. And you could send your group of employees, you could break them out. Say you have 20 new hires, and you break them out into 4 groups of 5, or vice versa. And then you send them out to their different stations to learn. You could spend 10 to 15 concentrated minutes on one thing and do that for, rotate them around. And within an hour, you've taught them a lot, and they've been able to touch it and talk about it and ask questions and do it for themselves. So that's one really great way to boost retention. The number 5 here is providing consistent tools and resources. And the reason I think this is important, because training is a real commitment, and it's a culture that has to permeate from the top to the bottom. And in order to successfully have a solid training plan, there must be consistent tools and resources. Very often we see training plans or service training go haywire because the employees simply don't have the tools or resources to do their job. They don't have enough towels to put on the cart. They don't have enough forks to set a setup for lunch. So they're constantly running around trying to make it work, and they're unable to focus in on the service details that you've asked them to. So providing these consistent tools and resources, I think, is very important. I already mentioned the online training. That's a great way to get a consistent message across. I also am a big fan of training checklists, and, the training checklist per job title, because that just helps to make sure that everyone is getting the same training, the same journey through the customer experience, and getting the same message as you go. So having these consistent tools and resources are really important, because you won't always have enough time to train everyone. You just simply won't, because something will come up. You'll be short-staffed, an event will pop up, any number of things could happen. So having these tools and resources at your disposal will help to keep you on track, and also make sure that your training message is consistent from one person to the next. Okay, once you get to this point, right, you have your tools and resources, you've got your trainer, you're working your way through with training checklists. The next thing is sort of holding it together. And I'm a big fan of sports teams. I study coaches. I played sports when I was younger, and I believe there's a lot to be learned from sports. So we have a program called Sports Minded Service, and this is the acronym and what it means. But we teach the managers, when they're looking at service and they're looking at how to coach their team and hold people accountable, because holding people accountable really is a key part of training. Because if you set the standard, but then you let someone slide under the standard, you've actually just given a nonverbal approval of a new standard. And that's how you can turn around one day and everything is different than you thought it was. People are getting different messages. So coaching is a way to hold everyone accountable, hold the team accountable. And, some of the things that a coach does, they set goals with the team. They prepare with and for the team. They keep the team organized. They respect the team. They demand respect of each other. And they teach trust. trusting teammates and trusting that everyone has a job to do and that everyone's going to do their job. And then I put success on here because if you're holding people accountable, if you're focused on people's strengths and you're coaching for improvement, and I call it the coach approach, because in management, sometimes people get uncomfortable having these conversations, and I try to help them see, what if you were a coach on a team? You wouldn't just let this go, right? You would want to improve for your next game. You would want that player to know that they're doing X, Y, and Z great, but you also want them to do A, B, and C great, and they're this close, and this is all they have to do. So you give them tips to make them better. So, helping people see that part of training is being a good coach. And coaches don't often go out and look to criticize people. They often go out looking for what's right and how to build on people's strengths and how to put the right team together. So that's why I like that concept of being a good coach as part of training. Number 7 is following up and follow through. And what I mean by that is when you're training, as you go through, if you ask someone to do something and you don't go back and inspect their work, and I know there's a cliche saying, but I like them because they're true, but people will do what you inspect, not what you expect. So that's basically what this means. So as part of training, if you're teaching something, if you're training someone to do something, you have to go back and follow up. And some of you may remember the term management by walking around. And I still believe in that. And I think doing that is you're basically walking around your property, you're walking around your areas. And what you're really doing is you're following up and you're looking for evidence that your service plan is working. So what you do when you're going around and you're following up, you want to give positive recognition, where it's due. Make sure that people know what they're doing is important. You didn't just assign them busy work. You didn't just tell them to do something to, have them look productive, but what they're doing really matters. I just watched something the other day, and I'm not going to remember if it was a hotel chain, but there was a study done. There was a study done, and I feel like a college did the study, and what they were testing, and the reason I thought it was funny was because they paid to have this study done. But what they found was the hotel locations, they had a control group, and they had the test group. The hotel locations that had a manager who would notice every time there were no spots on the doors or the windows, and would comment to the doorman or the concierge who were in that main area. All they did was say, "Wow, it's great. We don't have any fingerprints. That's wonderful. But it's so clean. I think it's great. We don't have to worry about this." That hotel group, it was something like 60% more had clean windows and doors than the managers who were every day going and asking someone to clean the windows or clean the doors. And I just thought it was fascinating. But I think what it does is it reminds us that people have a natural human need to be recognized and to be appreciated. So this follow-up and following through, if you make a promise or you've asked someone to do something, it's real important as part of your training that you're going back around and you are recognizing that it was done. And not, a lot of people say, well, I shouldn't have to recognize it. That's their job. They're doing their job. But, I think times have changed, and certainly different generations need more feedback than others. But I think, this idea of appreciation and recognition really taps into people's internal motivation. So I think it's a key to maintaining trust with staff. The number 8 best practice is using a training plan. One thing, you really can't get anything done if you don't know where you're going. And I always equate it to, if we were going on a road trip together, how would we know where to go? We would have to have a map GPS, but we would have to know where we're going, what we're trying to do. And this is basically what the ADDIE process is. So the ADDIE model, it's another acronym, and it stands for Analyze What You Need. So this is basically determining what is it that you need, what training is needed. The next one, once you analyze the training that's needed, now you design how to deliver that training, right? Design what you think is the best way to get that message across. Then you go about developing the actual training. This would be content, visual aids, photos, videos, whatever the best way to deliver that message. And then set aside the time, the right time for you and the employees to implement the training, and at the end, evaluate if that worked. So as an example, I mean, today with iPhones and iPads, we have so many opportunities to take photos or videos of what we want. So if you have your pro shop set up, you know, take a video of someone folding a shirt. This is how we do it, and incorporate that into training. Or this is how we merchandise. You know, this is how we set up the range. This is how we set up the golf cart. This is what our snack bar should look like. There's so many opportunities and easy ways to communicate that these days. But you really have to understand, what is it you're trying to train? And that all starts with analyzing, designing, developing the training, having the time to implement it and plan for it and be organized about planning, and then evaluate whether or not it works. So this is a kind of a constant cycle, putting your training plan together. Number 9, I have as a best practice is really to be realistic, especially if you're in a seasonal location. I hear so many managers, they have great ideas and they have great goals and they want to accomplish so much in the off season, and they create a giant list of items to do, and it's just not humanly possible. Change takes time, and putting a real thoughtful training plan together, believe me, I do it every day. It takes time. It takes time to figure out what you want, how you're going to deliver it, putting the materials together, making sure everything fits, choosing your trainers, training your trainers. But I think you have to really be understanding with yourself, be realistic, because very often training plans fail because they just aren't realistic. So it would be unrealistic to say in one day you could teach a new hire everything they needed to know about the club and their job skills and your customers and how to solve a customer service opportunity, how to use radios, how to answer the phone, how to transfer the phone, how to take a tea time, all of those things. Those are all small processes and systems that need training within the greater plan. So you have to really be realistic. You know, if you just take a tea time as an example, how do you teach someone to make a tea time? They have to know how to use the system if it's automated. They have to know how to read the tea sheet. They have to know how to modify a tea time possibly. They have to know how, if they're taking it over the phone, they have to know how to answer the phone appropriately, how to place someone on hold graciously. You know, and how to make the time. They might need to know rules and regulations about your course or your club. So there's a lot more that goes into it than I can spend 10 minutes with them and teach them how to use our tea time system. You might have an app that they need to understand and be able to troubleshoot. There's just so much that goes into it. So you really have to be realistic and understand what training resources you have at your disposal, and really set yourself up to think about it one step at a time. The last best training practice that I have here is modeling the behavior that you want. And I just really can't stress this enough. We go out and we do club evaluations often, or we're asked to go in and evaluate managers. And it's very sad sometimes that a manager knows what they want. They communicate what they want from the staff, but their behavior is in direct conflict. So I'll give you a quick example. I went to a club. This was a club structure that had an assistant general manager. And the assistant general manager blocked out, I think it was New Year's Eve. Obviously, it was like a New Year's Eve event. So he made it a day where no one could request time off. He made every manager come in. People had to change their plans because this was different from the club's practice in the past. He made everyone come in and work that event, and he left the club at 8 o'clock at night. and the rest of them were there left to close up and were there till 2 a.m. He didn't have the respect of anyone at that club by the end of the night. And if you're a leader and you're trying to train people and you're asking them to do something, you have to be willing to model the behavior that you want. So if you say it's really critical, no one can take a day off, and I explained to him, I said, you just have to understand from their perspective, you have to model the behavior you're asking them to have. So the expectation, if they're all giving up time with their families, this is a change to club policy from the past, you have to be kind of in the trenches with them as their leader. So I have a little note here, be the leader that you would follow. I think that's really important. How you act absolutely matters. And sometimes as managers work their way up the ladder, we forget that there are new employees coming in, maybe younger employees coming in, and they see you differently as a manager than you may see yourself. They look to you for guidance. They look to you as the leader. And I think it's real important to also understand that how you treat your employees is how they will treat your customers. That's absolutely true. So if you are dismissive of an employee, they're going to be dismissive of a customer. So if you don't want that behavior, you have to really think about that. So I have just my top 3 things here, which is respect and appreciate employees, and therefore they will respect and appreciate your customers. Be trustworthy. Don't talk about one employee to another. Don't break promises. Don't take credit for their work. All the leadership things that we've all heard about. And use positive communication. And, it's amazing to me. I still coach a lot of people on positive communication, not using sarcasm, not laughing at someone. There's a difference between laughing at and laughing with. But using positive communication, because the way that you speak to an employee, if you want them to be optimistic and positive, your communications have to be optimistic and positive as well, because they're learning from you as a manager or an owner. So I'll just kind of summarize this. I've gone through what I think are top 10 best practices in training, and obviously there are probably another 100 steps within each one of these, specifically creating a training plan. But I just want to summarize by saying, first and foremost, you have to be specific about your desired objective. And what I always tell people is, make it so specific, such as, by the end of training, I want my opening staff member to be able to confidently and competently open the building alone and run it until the next staff member can come in. Once you figure that out, what you're trying to accomplish, now you determine your needs. So what does it take for that person? They might need alarm codes. They might need a key. They need to know how to turn on lights or music, computers. They may need to know how to check voicemail messages or email messages. They may need to understand how to turn on the computer and get the point of sale system working. They might need access to a cash bank. How to make sure that the credit card system was batched out last night. These are the minimums that someone might need to do that. But so you start making a list of, okay, I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, what do you need to make that happen? Once you determine what you need, then you develop a task list for each need. So as an example, if the person needs to know the alarm, the task list would be, they might need keys, they need alarm codes, they might need to know how to troubleshoot, but you have to then, that becomes a task list. And then from the task list, you develop an action plan. How am I going to deliver this training? What is my action plan to deliver the training? And the last thing I would just remind you is your training goals should support the club goals and long-range plans. And hopefully you all work with some sort of a strategic plan or an operating business plan, and your training should filter straight into that. The training should support all of those goals, because the decisions you make today, the actions you take today will absolutely produce your tomorrows. So I hope I didn't go too quickly through that. I'm trying to be very respectful of everyone's time. I appreciate you spending time with me and us today. And I'll just take a few minutes for some questions, if there are any. And Ronnie, if you want to add anything, feel free.
Okay. No, I'll open up to questions, and then we can go from there.
Okay. So I have a question. Given the diversity of the current workforce, do you recommend one person to do all training or multiple trainers who may be better able to connect with a particular generation or ethnicity? That's a really great question. I would go back to those qualities of a trainer. They have to at least be a subject matter expert. So you would, for your overall training and indoctrination into the club, that probably would be best suited for one person who could deliver that message very, very well, who understands different cultures, different generations, and is able to connect with people on a lot of different levels. But then once you get into departmental specific, I think you have to get different trainers involved because there's different expertise required. But still, the trainers, they really have to go back to, subject matter expert, respect of the team, respect for who they're training, the desire to learn, adaptable, all of those things. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in, so thank you all very much for your time. Ronnie, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this series. I really appreciate everyone joining us today.
Well, thank you, Whitney. We've certainly appreciated you leading this hospitality series. It's been quite eye-opening and informative, and we certainly appreciate that. I'd like to remind everyone that we will post this. Oh, did we get another question?
It was just a thank you. Thank you, Elaine.
We will be posting this webinar on our NGCOA members-only networking site, Accelerate, and we will make the presentation materials available as well. While you're there, again, I encourage you to check out the archive of other exclusive webinars and additional educational materials we have on a variety of topics related to golf course management and maintenance. And finally, as I mentioned, this series has been part of a larger education initiative that we're trying to roll out next year. Along those lines, I encourage you to start thinking ahead to the Golf Business Conference in February. Whitney has agreed to lead a workshop on the first day of that, which will take place while the others are playing golf. The educational aspect will focus on the customer journey, and it'll be a 4-hour session on that, and very comprehensive and in-depth. So I encourage you to mark that on your calendars. It doesn't look like there are any other questions, so once again, I'd like to thank you, Whitney.
Thank you.
And each of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us. Until the